Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today's episode is about, you won't believe this, Tang. Yeah, the powdered drink mix that somehow became shorthand for the space age. We'll trace its origin story, why it was invented in the first place, how NASA ended up serving it in orbit, and why there are so many flavors now. What the name Tang is really pointing to, and whether it's actually a U.S. thing or a global one.
And right up front, we should clear away the biggest myth. NASA did not invent Tang. NASA's own spin off myth, frequently asked question list, is very blunt. General Foods developed Tang in 1957, and astronaut John Glenn, future senator from Ohio, consumed it in orbit in 1962, which is what cemented the association.
Which is funny because culturally it feels like it was created for rockets, but the real story is much more grounded than that. Post-war food science, convenience products, vitamin fortification, and a marketplace where instant was a selling point, and spaceflight turns it into a symbol. Let's walk through it from the beginning, Dr. Weaver.
Yeah, let's do that, Chandler. So, at its very simplest, Tang is a shelf-stable, powdered beverage mix designed to be lightweight, portable, and easy to reconstitute with water. That sounds rather mundane, but the mid-20th century was the golden age of that idea. Powders, crystals, concentrates, foods engineered to be consistent, fast, and modern. Tang fits that trend pretty precisely, doesn't it, Dr. Deneen?
It does. It also fits a specific consumer promise, a breakfast adjacent orange drink that didn't require fresh oranges, a juicer, or refrigeration. Some of the earliest marketing framed it like carnation as an instant breakfast, a drink fortified with vitamins, less a soft drink, more a pleasant tasting nutritional convenience. This positioning reappears again and again in historical accounts of the product's launch era. You had something to say about that, Shanna.
Well, if someone asks, why invent Tang? Well, the answer isn't because people wanted fake orange. It's because the food industry wanted reliable and scalable flavor and vitamin fortification, and consumers wanted speed. Tang is basically technology for turning water into a consistent citrus style drink anywhere, anytime, at home, in a lunchbox, or later, even in a capsule.
Yes. Yeah, Tang was developed at General Foods. A key figure is food chemist William Mitchell, who came up with a powdered fruit-flavored drink in 1957 that was marketed in 1959 as Tang.
Several sources also name a second inventor at General Foods, chemist William Bruce James, a protege of Marjorie Merriweather Post, see our podcast about her, working alongside Mitchell in the formulation and early development. It was James who convinced General Foods fast food franchise Burger Chef to develop a breakfast menu to go with Tang. Tang is usually described as formulated in 1957 and first marketed publicly in late 1959 after a number of test markets.
And Mitchell matters beyond Tang because he's emblematic of a whole era of industrial food invention. Someone whose job was to create convenience products that felt futuristic. Tang wasn't a one-off novelty. It was part of a pipeline of engineered foods that matched the tempo of mid-century American life.
So, Here's where we need to be pretty careful. I can explain what the word Tang means and why it makes sense as a brand name, but I don't want to pretend that we have a single definitive quote for the naming meeting. And it's just not there. We don't know why it was called Tang. But do you have something to say about that, Dr. Lean?
I do. Linguistically, tang means a sharp, distinctive, often lingering flavor, kind of like my lime Coke, exactly what you'd associate with citrus. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines tang as a sharp, distinctive, lingering flavor. Now, isn't that basically a built-in marketing pitch for an orange flavored drink?
Yeah, I guess so, isn't it? Isn't it, Chandler?
It sure is. And the most grounded explanation for that is they chose a short, punchy English word that signals tangy, meaning a bright, sharp flavor, especially appropriate for an orange style drink. Without an archival memo, that is the best evidence based interpretation. The name is an on the nose promise about taste. Now, Dr. Weaver, I want to get into one of the most famous and talked about uses, I would say, for Tang.
Yeah.
Tell us about the astronauts, Dr. Weaver.
Yeah. NASA's side of the story starts with practicality, not branding. NASA confirms that John Glenn consumed Tang while in orbit in 1962. And that's what drove public awareness of the Space Drink Association.
It makes sense. The why has a few layers. First, powdered drinks are lightweight and compact, which matters in pre shuttle spacecraft logistics. Secondly, they integrate easily with onboard water systems. You're not shipping bulky bottles. And there's a sensory issue finally. Water and space systems can have off flavors from storage and processing, and astronauts in those days were eating food out of toothpaste tubes. But a major food history write up notes that NASA identified Tang as useful for improving the taste of onboard water and nutrition because the water was otherwise unappealing.
Well, Dr. Deneen, this is where the myth machine kicks in. You see, because Tang became famous thanks to NASA's visibility, many people assumed that it must have been invented for astronauts. However, NASA explicitly denies that. It existed first. Spaceflight just turned it into pop culture. Now, Dr. Weaver, did John Glenn choose Tang?
Well, not really in the sense of John Glenn requested Tang and NASA packed his favorite drink. No, not really. NASA's own materials describe Tang as something NASA adopted for the Mercury food system, and NASA itself referred to it generically as orange drink. The broader pattern uh, NASA describes is that they package commercially available beverage powders, and astronauts select items for their menus from what's available. So the choice is usually within a NASA provided list, not an astronaut bringing a branded preference from home. Yeah. So a detailed popular account interviewing a space historian also emphasizes NASA's brand protection. They flew the drink mix, but didn't call it Tang on the packaging because NASA didn't want to endorse a company. Again, pointing to this being a program system decision, not Glenn saying, I'm picking Tang.
We do know he drank it because NASA's spin-off frequently asked question directly states astronaut John Glenn consumed Tang while in orbit in 1962, and the Space Food Podcast transcript similarly says he tasted it in space, describing it as something that NASA purchased and repackaged for the flight. Whether it was a favorite of his, we're not sure. I can't find a solid primary source where he says, I really like that. That was my favorite. Although I remember when he ran for president in 1984, there was a headline in the Washington Post, Tang goes to the White House. What is well documented is that question, whether he liked it or not, followed him for years. Senator Glenn is quoted during his 1970 campaign. People would quickly derail serious discussion about Vietnam, inflation, and other things by asking him repeatedly, do astronauts drink and like Tang in space? He joked about it publicly later on. He had an interview by CBS News during 1998 when he returned on the shuttle, and he used it as, for me, a reference point rather than endorsing it as directly a personal favorite.
So the most careful answer here is that Glenn drank it on the mission, but there is no strong evidence that he personally selected Tang as a brand choice or that it was a long-standing favorite drink. The Tang and Glenn bond is largely a NASA menu and packaging decision that later became a cultural meme, amplified by advertising that leaned hard on space imagery while avoiding explicit NASA endorsement language.
So once you understand Tang as a platform, powdered flavor plus sweetness plus fortification, the flavor expansion becomes almost inevitable. If the underlying technology works, you can swap flavor systems to create a full lineup and tailor those flavors to different consumer tastes and markets. And I know, Dr. Deneen, you have a thing about different flavors and tastes.
I do. Historically, that flavor expansion happened relatively early. Accounts of Tang's product history describe new flavors appearing within a few years of its launch, like grapefruit in 1964, grape the following year. Now there are 30 different flavors. This suggests that General Foods was experimenting quickly with how broad this concept could be.
Absolutely, Dr. Deneen. And the more modern reason is global growth. A 2011 investor press release from Kraft Foods, the company that owned Tang at the time, explicitly ties Tang's growth to developing markets that highlights exotic flavors as part of their brand's strategy. Flavors like tamarind, lemon pepper, and soursop, and describing Tang reaching billion-dollar status.
Wow, billion dollar. Yeah,
Think about that, $1 billion. That's with that B again.
yeah, with a B.
Yeah.
Yeah, so is Tang available outside the US? Well, yes, it is, very much so. And in a way that's important to the brand's current identity. Ownership itself hints at this. Tang's brand rights are split, with Mondelez owning Tang in most countries, while Kraft Heinz owns it in North America.
Now, Mondelez's own Tang brand page is essentially a map of its global presence. It lists country sites across regions throughout Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, among many others. I had it in Cape Town when I was meeting with uh, Benjamin Scozana over there in 2008. That's a direct evidence of international availability, and it matches the broader reporting that Tang is particularly strong outside the contemporary North American, US, and Canadian market.
Interesting.
That is interesting, which means the common American memory. Tang as a nostalgic 1960s space drink is only part of the story. In many places, Tang is not retro at all. It is a current, actively marketed powdered beverage brand with local flavors and packaging formats shaped around regional preferences.
Wow.
Now, Dr. Weaver,
Yes,
how
sir.
popular is Tang really?
Well, popularity can be kind of tricky to quantify because companies don't always publish exact unit sales by country. But we do have a strong indicator. Corporate communications around 2011 explicitly described Tang reaching billion-dollar status, as we mentioned before, which, while a snapshot in time, signals some pretty major global scales.
And that aligns with reputable journalism describing Tang's post peak trajectory in the United States versus its continued strength abroad. Food and Wine, a very reputable magazine, frames Tang as less dominant, as we said, in the modern American imagination, but still strong in international markets, focusing on South Korea, for example, contributing to that billion-dollar global brand characterization.
So, the cleanest and the most scholarly way to say it is that Tang is globally significant, with much of its momentum in developing and international markets, and its flavor diversity is part of the mechanism of that popularity because it lets the brand behave less like a single orange product and more like a localized beverage system.
Wow. Wow, Chandler. That is so interesting to me because I really didn't know that before we started doing this.
And I didn't know it either. I've always liked Tang ever since I was like 4 years old. I have been obsessed with it. I love it, loved it, and even have tried some of the different flavors. And I've been drinking it pretty much for, I would say, 22 years. But like you said, Dr. Weaver, before we started this, I didn't know some of this information,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially where part of where some of it originated from.
Yeah.
I only knew because a friend of mine was going on the pilgrimage in Mecca that the Muslims go on and took some with him.
Wow. Wow. Okay, well, Tang's story is a neat case study in how mid-century convenience invention becomes a cultural symbol. First, through the instant revolution, then through NASA's visibility, and finally through global market adaptation.
And it's very important for you to remember one key correction. Tang wasn't born in a laboratory for astronauts. It was born in a food lab for consumers, and then space made it famous.
Which might be the most Tang thing of all. A sharp little flavor idea that stuck around and traveled far beyond its original kitchen.
You got that one right. I really didn't think it was going to be this much information available, but I'm sure pleased that it was. Hope you
Well, I
enjoyed
figured
it.
we would get somewhere with it.
Yeah, you sure enough did. And you were right. And we appreciate you listening. Hope you'll come back and join us. And so for Chandler and Dr. Deneen and myself, I wish you a good day and hope you come back and see us real soon. Bye bye.